It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to It's Just Business on the Hogsty Network, the show where we look at the dollars and nonsense of the sports media business industrial complex. Today, we're going to go back to the mothership probably and spend a lot of time in the National Football League. So, Steve, how are you?
I'm doing all right, man. Yeah, it's been a pretty big week, especially for Washington fans, but NFL fans in general. And got free agency, the TV contracts, which we're going to get to, got announced. There's a lot going on here for the offseason, which much to the NFL's, great pleasure, I might add.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, baseball's had what they call the Black Stove League, right? Isn't that what they call it?
Why, Hot Stove League.
Hot Stove, right. And, and then the NBA has been sort of sexy the last couple years, the last 10 years with their offseason. It's almost like the NFL got offended by that and, decided to own the offseason as well.
You will not trump us in the offseason.
Yeah. It definitely feels like that this winter.
Yeah, it kind of does. And baseball is it's weird because baseball is kind of in a dead zone because they're in spring training. The season's about to start, but spring training's like the hardcore baseball nuts care, but nobody else really does, and there's not any news. And so, and then the NBA is going on, obviously, right now. They just had the trade deadline come and go, I noticed. I don't watch the NBA anymore, but...
I haven't watched the NBA for a long stretch, as regular listeners probably can remember. And so I just quickly read through the end of trade deadline trade ticker, and I was like, I recognize maybe 10% of these names.
Yeah, I've kind of lost interest in it, and so I don't really pay too much attention anymore. But I don't think any major game-changing trades were made. There were several. I hate to call them side trades, but there were no major stars traded. Put it like that. I don't think.
No, it seemed like a lot of back half of the roster moves, which in the NBA is 6 through 12.
Well, that's right, or maybe even 4 through 12.
Yeah.
In a lot of teams, But anyway, yeah, it's I don't know. I don't want to get into the NBA. You know what? I have a whole rant on the NBA, and I've said it before, and I don't need to say it again. It makes me feel good about myself when I can rant about it, but I'm going to do everybody a favor. I'm not going to do it.
It's empty calories, Steve. It's empty calories.
I know. It's kind of like eating a donut.
Yeah. All right. All right, let's get into it. We're obviously part of the Hogsty Network, and the flagship show is the Hogsty, and this is basically a Washington football team podcast that expands and sort of continues to develop. And so on It's Just Business, we don't really necessarily try to talk about Daniel Snyder. We don't really try to talk about Washington football team issues much at all. But we just can't escape it. If we were doing this show from San Francisco or Austin, Texas, or Ann Arbor, Michigan, we probably would still be talking about Dan Snyder because it's that big a sports business story. A lot of interesting parts to this one. If you are a Washington football team fan and you're not a big fan of Daniel Snyder, then this has not been a good week. Steve, explain how he consolidated power.
Okay, so Dan Snyder and his sister and I believe his mother collectively own about 60% of the shares of the Washington football team, the entity that controls the Washington football team. Another 40% have been owned by the three people who he's been in physical combat with for, at least a year, more than that. Fred Smith, who's the CEO of FedEx, Dwight Scharr, and Robert Rathman. And so what happened here is, going all the way back to the beginning, Snyder has not paid out distributions for the past some period of time. And distributions meaning the share of the profits that are supposed to go to the other shareholders. the money that they're supposed to make for being a part of this little enterprise. And so they got super mad at Dan Snyder, and then that resulted in things like FedEx threatening to take the name of their company off the stadium, which caused Snyder to have to change the team name. Nobody think it was about politics or about anybody trying to be politically correct. It was, or anybody cares about what some Native American tribe thinks. It was all about FedEx. So there's that. And then the 3 minority shareholders marketed their shares collectively as a unit to try and sell them because they hate Dan Snyder with the fire of 1,000 suns. And so what happened was then that Snyder thinks one of them, Dwight Schrute, is responsible for the rumors of his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein that resulted in the Indian lawsuit that we have talked about on this show. And so as a result of that, Snyder has tried to block the sale of the minority shares. And they had this buyer this billionaire out in California, or billionaire, I think there were 2 of them, out in California ready to buy. But Snyder exercised his right of first refusal in a weird way and said, you can't do this, basically. So it ended up in court. And then the lawsuit, because the NFL has rules, ended up in front of an arbitrator. Well, hallelujah. I'm sure Washington fans are thrilled. Redskins fans are thrilled. This week, the parties have reached an agreement on a settlement. What this means is that Snyder is not selling the team like everybody hoped. That was never going to happen, people. What has happened was Dan's going to buy the other 40%. Now, and we don't know if it's Dan and his sister or his mother or who, but the Snyder, either Dan and his family are buying the other 40% for the tune of a mere $875 million. And of that $875 million, he is financing $450 million. Now that has to be approved by the NFL because there are debt rules. What that means is you can't finance more than a certain amount of a purchase of a football team because the NFL does not want to have like Chase Bank coming in foreclose. And so they want to have the debt manageable. That's really what it's about. So that's pending, but the NFL is going to approve it. And so what's the interesting part is if you do some math, which I'll spare you, but which I have done, $875 million comes out to a valuation of a smidge under about $2.2 billion for the team. Now that strikes me, one, as maybe a tiny bit low, but in the ballpark. And so and Dan paid about $800 million in the first place for when he bought the 60% of it back, what is it now, 24 years ago, 23 years ago?
Yeah, I'm trying to think
96, 97, whenever it was, something like that. So he's paying about the same amount for 40% as he did for 60%. So it's crazy. But that's the nutshell of it. And so what this means is Dan's not going anywhere. Now, the other part of this, as we've talked about, is that the NFL has this Beth Wilkinson investigation going on into the sexual harassment allegations inside the building in D.C., in Ashburn. I think it's safe to say that if the NFL approves his request to increase the debt limit to allow him to finance the $450 million, that this investigation will be swept under the table, never to be seen again. Or he'll receive a light, smack on the butt and sent on his way, and we'll never hear from it again. What are your thoughts, Chris?
Now, I had seen some reporting that said the NFL had already agreed to waive or expand or increase the debt ceiling.
Okay, yeah, I've got a story here. Let's see. Give me 1 second here. I should have had it pulled up, and of course I didn't. This is from CNBC. It's thinking. Okay, this is from Wednesday, March 24th. And it says here, NFL owners are scheduled to vote on Snyder's debt request next week, meaning the week you're about to listen to this. I don't think the original report is from the New York Times, and the Times is the one who reported this originally. And the Times said that Snyder will seek approval from the NFL for the $450 million in debt. So I think if CNBC and the New York Times are to be believed, and New York Times is rag that needs to be thrown in the trash can. But if they can be believed on this particular instance, it's just a request pending. And that, Chris, you may have other information, but that's what I see here, is that it's still a request pending, because I think the owners have to vote on it.
I think I'm sort of searching to see. I think what we can safely say is that
the NFL's given a wink and a nod about
it.
it.
I think it might have even been. I think what there is some kind of formal approval from like a subcommittee. So some smaller group of owners had to make a recommendation.
That may be true. So
yeah,
and look, it's not in question. Okay.
Yeah, it's going to happen.
Here's the thing. Dan Snyder is not well liked among owners. He doesn't have a lot of power in the NFL. He's one of probably the least influential owners in the entire league. You know, he's the fat kid in the corner that nobody likes. But he's still an owner. And what the NFL owners do not want to have happen is what the minority shareholders are trying to do to Dan, force him out. They do not want to be forced out of their own teams. They've got their own skeletons in their closet. None of these guys are particularly good people. You know, they're the only way you can become a billionaire is to step on a few hundred toes, you know, and be brutal and ruthless in business, unless you're a Walton, in which case you just inherit billions. So they don't want this to happen to them. And so they're going to approve this. There's no doubt that this is going to get approved, because they do not want Dan to lose the team, because they're afraid of it happening to them. You know, and so all of this collected. And now, by the way, we don't know what this means for the Dwight Schrute Indian lawsuit. There's been no new reporting on that at all. So I don't know if they've reached a settlement on that as well, and that lawsuit is going to go away. That is unknown at this time. I would assume, if I were Dwight Schrute, I would never agree to any of this without that lawsuit also going away. So it kind of makes sense, but we'll see on that. And that's, you know, the most salacious part of it. So it was the most interesting to follow for sure. But I would assume if he's smart, he'd settle that one too.
In the original New York Times piece, they do mention in there that there had been some level of approval for the debt increase, which, by the way, you know, we'll talk about this in more detail, but is definitely linked to the TV contract. So, because if the NFL doesn't have the confidence from that 10-year TV deal, then they may not allow for the debt limit to increase, because now they just know that they basically guaranteed that the owner, I'll take this away from Snyder in a second, because any owner, the rule will apply to all owners. They have full confidence that they can recoup that debt, and the debt, you know, Chase Bank won't own the team, because they know where 10 years of revenue's coming from. So I think they're all dominoes here. Once the NFL had the confidence that they had the TV deal, then they can change those policies and allow this to proceed. They also mentioned in the original New York Times article that, and it's a little bit of a buried lead, but they do say, and they do mention additional fines for Snyder. So I think that's the tell that what Steve said earlier in terms of the Beth Wilkinson report. This is all part of the same.
It's all worked out.
Yeah,
it's all worked out.
He's going to receive a fine. It may not be nominal, but it will not be crushing. It will not be debilitating, and it'll all be probably at that point worked into his refinancing plan, and he'll get so we'll know that nothing catastrophic for him will happen from that. That's already been negotiated, what his penalty is. All Washington football team fans, and I'd say actually NFL fans in general, can just hopefully breathe a sigh of relief that they don't attack the team in terms of draft picks or salary cap restrictions or other kind of team management punishments. I don't think that's going to be a part of it, or I think that would have leaked already as well. And I totally agree.
That was not in the Times article.
No, it was not. And I totally agree with you. I think, and this is where I think the other big shoe to drop for the NFL, I do not think we will see the continuation of these lawsuits between mostly Schar, but all three of the minority or ex-minority owners, and Snyder. I think the NFL said, because there's a lot at play here, right? You got the Wilkinson report, you got the debt financing, you got the TV contracts. I think the NFL said, listen, you need to have this go away, because just as Steve was saying, in terms of, one of the reasons why we kind of, even my hopes got up, but my intellectual side knew this wasn't going to happen. My emotional side was allowing for the possibility, but this night the owners do not kneecap their own because they don't want skeletons in their closet, and so for the same reason they're like, Dan, we'll let you do this, but this toxicity engine that you've created with these lawsuits also needs to go away, because
make this effing go away as soon as possible.
Yeah, because that was bad for the league and the other owners, in the same way that taking out an owner would be a slippery slope.
The last thing they want is for stuff about the NFL to come out in a freaking Indian court. That's disaster. So no, I suspect you're right. I suspect all of this has been worked out. And it's going to go away. And even if he gets fined a couple $1,000,000, think about it like this, too, from Dan's perspective. He's hemorrhaging money. I mean, just bleeding all over the floor in $100 bills right now, because he's litigating an international lawsuit that's got like 10 different discovery lawsuits filed all over the country. He's got lawyers in India. He's got people going back and forth to India for this thing. Obviously, it's they're not doing it by telephone, and so he's going to save by ending the lawsuit and swallowing his pride a little bit, because he's swallowing some pride here, believe me. But by ending the lawsuit, all the fine is doing is offsetting the legal fees, which are 7 or 8 figures at this point. Probably. So ultimately, Dan will be fine. Thank God. Dan and his money will be fine. Now, why God help us. He'll just have to maybe, skip on a trip to the Caribbean, with his yacht. Now, why is he financing this amount, you ask? Chris knows the answer to this. But the answer is almost no billionaire has that much, has $800 million in cash sitting around. Even a guy like Jeff Bezos probably does not have that much cash lying around, because what Bezos does is just cash in stock options whenever he wants to buy something. So nobody with that, it's not like a regular person who's a hardworking middle-class person who puts money in a savings account and, maybe has some, mutual fund investments, and that's not what billionaires do. So he doesn't have that kind of cash sitting around. And especially Dan, who's cratered every business he's ever had, he definitely doesn't have that kind of cash sitting around. So has no choice but to finance it. So that's why we're financing it. But yeah, I think this is part of an as of yet reported master settlement that will allow Dan to go back to the business of ruining the Washington football team on the field instead of off the field. And really what the NFL cares about is stopping the embarrassment of the Shield. And number one. And number two, protecting the other owners from having to go through the same thing. Particularly that, because I can promise you, I'd bet the house that there are other women and other teams and other reporters who've had their butt grabbed and have been harassed, and maybe not to the extent it is in Washington, because they had just a horrible toxic culture, even for the NFL. But I can promise you, other teams have this problem to a lesser extent. They don't want to have to deal with it. So let's make all of this go away. And Dan, you can go back to sitting in the corner with your lollipop, while the big boys run the league.
That's the depressing part, because this really feels to me like a clean sweep of his problems, which means, by September 2021, he could be back focusing on, because I think it's no surprise that the team actually improved in fundamental ways, both on the field and how you run the team as a football operation, because he was distracted by all these things. Well, we sort of just cleared the chessboard here, so he can sort of be back to, with his lawn chair on the sideline at training camp.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now he has to swallow his pride a little bit, because he's got to pay Dwight Schrute $150 million, and I know he doesn't want to do that, but it's by his standards, a small price to pay to allow him to keep the team in peace and harmony, for the foreseeable future. So I think this means that congratulations, Washington fans. We are stuck with Dan Snyder as the owner for the remainder of most of our lives. Let that sink in for a minute, people. Wait, let's let it sink in, okay? God, that's depressing. But it's just the way it is. So yeah, that's exactly right. I think I think probably in July and August we will see Dan with his sunglasses in a suit or a tracksuit on the sidelines in training camp, pretending like nothing happened.
No. Yes, but I
You
love.
think he's been humbled at all, Chris?
No, I think he sees this as a victory. I think even the little bit of the losing face and having to pay out those three minority owners at that point, they got less than they wanted. They got paid out on a valuation which is like ridiculously low.
2.2 billion strikes me as a little bit lower than what he could sell the team for on the open market.
I think if he flipped, I think I'll take the wild-eyed fan theory out there that he consolidated his ownership so that he could sell and get the most money. I know that sounds nice and that might help you sleep at night, but it's not what's going on. But let's just play out that fantasy for a second. And he he gets all this done and he puts the team up for sale in 3 months or whatever. He's going to get double that on a bad day.
Yeah. Yeah, and allow me to dissuade you specifically. If you think this is a part of some master plan to sell, you don't take a loan for $450 million to turn around and sell the team later. If you were going to sell the team, you would allow the minority, you would work out a deal wherein the minority shares are packaged with your family's shares and sell it all at once. That's what you would do. And so, yeah, this means that he's not selling the team. You don't go through the effort of getting the NFL to approve your debt increase to sell the team in a year. That's just not going to happen. So, yeah, no, I agree with you. And I just think, hey, if you're a fan of this team, you're just going to have to deal with Dan Snyder for the foreseeable decades to come. He's said in the past he wants to give the team to his children, and so I don't think his ownership's going anywhere.
Now, the real only open question here is, do you see him? Because he's pretty leveraged at this point, right?
He's paid. Remember, he's paid down a bunch of the original debt. It's been 24 years, so he's paid down a big chunk of the original principal.
Oh, for sure. But I'm just saying, his other businesses aren't. He had to get creative in the financing this. So,
yes.
Do you think he brings in more minority owners? Do you think he?
No.
Yeah, I don't. I think that my tendency is to agree with you, but that'll be an interesting thing to watch. Like if he needs to bring in 2 or 3 investors at similar or probably less than the stakes that those 3 had, it's going to show you that he needs that money.
Yeah, but my thing here and thinking through that calculus is who on earth would want to be his partner? I'm serious. I mean, he's alienated his first three partners. Don't forget he got the team in the first place by slicing the throat of Howard Milstein back in the mid-90s. Because remember, Howard Milstein was originally the principal and Snyder was a minority shareholder, and Snyder cut Milstein out of the deal. That's why he got the team in the first place. But I just don't know who would want to be his business partner. Every business he's ever had has gone under. He got thrown out of Six Flags. Johnny Rockets is sort of gone. I mean, there may be a few left, but it's certainly not what he hoped. And he got thrown out of Paramount Pictures. He was in bed with Tom Cruise, remember?
Yeah.
And I think he's out of that deal. So I just don't know. I mean, obviously, I guess you could find somebody somewhere, but I think it would be tough for him to find anybody to want to be his partner at this point, especially when you're expressly denying distributions to your former partners, and that's why they were mad at you. I mean, why would anybody want to buy into that arrangement?
Yeah, fair point. But I do think that's the only open question here. I think the rest of the things are closed books.
Yes. This is the Dan Snyder show until we die.
I was so hoping for the Steinbrenner deal where they suspend him don't take his ownership, suspend him for enough time that new football leadership could take over, and then the Yankees with Joe Torre and Brian Cashman and I can't remember I can't remember his name, but anyway, they basically were allowed to run the team long enough for them to go on a run.
Yeah, I remember that, and no, that's not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
By the way, we on a related but random note, we did. Thank you to the Washington football team PR staff who granted us access to Jason Wright's talk about rebranding on Clubhouse this week. We were able to listen to that. We were invited to the Hoity Toity Clubhouse Club to do that. And he had a lot of it was just a bunch of marketing stuff that would bore a lot of people. But the points that came out of that are: one, the band will return. Number two, this is a long-term project. There's multiple stages of this thing. We're only in the beginning. They're gonna continue to take fan input for a while on the name, but at some point it's gonna stop. And then they're going to go about the process of selecting the team name. They're not at that point. He was asked by the moderator whether Washington football team was on the table, because he had sort of indicated that was a possibility. And what he said was, nothing is off the table yet because we are not at the point at which we are eliminating names. That's what he said. So we're not going to see a team name anytime soon. It'll take at least a year, I think. But that was sort of the briefing from the Jason Wright Clubhouse rebranding talk.
Yeah, I'm sure we get more opportunities to talk about that as time goes on. But let's switch to what really was the huge NFL story, and as we mentioned, did actually have implications on the Snyder news and the internal machinations, and that is that something we talked about for months, weeks, years, but it's finally come to fruition, or mostly come to fruition, in terms of how the how the NFL will be viewed on whatever we're calling television. And that amounts to $110 billion deal over 10 to 11 years. There's a little bit of sometimes a discrepancy on the amount of time. Really doesn't matter. But it's a massive...
It's options and stuff is the discrepancy. Go ahead, sorry.
It's a massive deal. It basically does very similar rights to Fox and CBS in terms of the AFC, NFC packages and Sundays and doubleheaders and so on and so forth. And when I say the same, I'm saying same in terms of how it operates, not the same in terms of the cost. The NBC retains the crown jewel, which is the Sunday night broadcast. The interesting things are, which we talked about for a few episodes now, is that, whatever you want to call them, Disney, ABC, ESPN, they kept their Monday Night Football, but with some tweaks. Some really important tweaks are that this ABC is now officially in the Super Bowl rotation and playoff games. That Disney, I guess, will decide they have some rights to move some games to ABC on Monday night, so they get some flexibility. All those games will be on ESPN Plus regardless, so they do have a overt streaming and mobile option for those games. And then probably from a competitive standpoint, the most important thing is they have now given flex, similar to how Sunday Night Football was able to flex games in the end of the season, so for watchability, basically. No one wants to see two fourth-place division teams, battle it out in December. Monday night will now have some flex game options, which really, considering that now you'll have two primetime games, you're gonna see a lot of the last month of the season is going to be interesting on what games are where, which does have some competitive balance. Also has some effect on fan experience, right? Because if you buy a ticket for what you think is a time and a date, and that somehow changes, or at least then there's some like downstream ways that they'll have to figure out how to do that, but whatever, they'll figure it out. And then the big change, really, everything I mentioned was sort of cosmetic, or moving the deck chairs around, but Amazon now is the exclusive 10-year broadcast only of Thursday Night Football. So Amazon did step in a big way. We do now have a streaming only option for the Thursday night games. I saw some analysis that kind of said that Amazon still lost on this to some degree, because basically the network still consolidated their power and basically made Amazon pay a premium for the worst product of all that's offered there, and they kind of lock them into something long term, which kind of boxes them out. And with the networks now basically already, and then over the life of this contract, are going to have streaming options anyway, you could make a case that the networks, or whatever we call their corporations that own those brands, really did both lock themselves in as the brands that own the NFL and give themselves the rights to expand into their streaming.
Yeah. Yeah. Number one, the surprising part about that is that NFL Network is apparently not simulcasting the Thursday games with Amazon. It's exclusive to Amazon, which means I'm gonna have to find some hacked website that will let me watch those games when Washington's on because I don't subscribe to Amazon. But um, I think everybody needs to understand this about the way Jeff Bezos operates. He doesn't think about today. He doesn't even think about tomorrow. He's a visionary, and I don't really like the guy personally, but he's a visionary in every sense of the word. He thinks about years in the future. He's not a today guy, and he doesn't care at all if he loses money today. He's setting himself up for the next contract. I can promise you that's what he's thinking about. He's setting himself up to gain a much bigger slice of the pie when the contracts come up next time. He's willing to broadcast crappy NFL games, probably at a loss for advertisers and Amazon Prime subscriptions for now, to allow him to grab a real slice of the pie at the next contract. That is what Amazon's thinking. I would bet my life on it. That's what Amazon's thinking. The other thing that I think is interesting out of this, that I think what's happened here is that, you know, these networks, the real networks, are not going to make money on this in advertising. They will in the Super Bowl, but regular games, this is a ton of money. 110 billion is a lot of money. And I think really what's going on here from a sort of long-term strategic marketing standpoint is I think the networks seem to be using the NFL to draw people into their streaming services. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, it
Oh
seems
yeah.
like, that's really what the benefit of this package is. It's not so much, yes, it's they want to be, you know, involved in the NFL, but it's really how do we drive customers to the future of broadcasting, which is streaming. How do we do that? We allow, now that the NFL's getting rid of DirecTV, they can stream all these games, and they're sort of drawing people into the wave of the future. So I think that's the most interesting part of it to me.
Yeah, and it's no different than what I mean. The reason why the NFL was always smart for them, basically since about the mid '80s on, was really when it sort of took a jump here. Was because it let them promote their whole, which at the time was mostly broadcast options, right? So there's a reason why 60 Minutes was one of the highest watched shows on television, and not it was quality and all that. But a giant reason was that they had the Sunday 4 o'clock game as the lead-in and advertising behemoth, right? And
And they had Andy Rooney, of course.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So patron saint of cranky guys everywhere is why Steve likes him.
Exactly.
So this is no different. It doesn't matter about how you watch it. It's still about the promotion of their big brand content. Where you get it doesn't matter. The philosophy and the value transaction is still the same for these networks. So I completely agree. In fact, it's doubled now because it's not only is it watch our thing, it's subscribe to our thing and watch our thing. It's actually a twofold now.
Yeah, you got to take a big picture approach what the networks are doing here. It's not about money today. It's not about ad revenue between the Bengals and the Lions. It's about a big picture perspective on how do we draw people into our content as defined broadly for the foreseeable future. That is what this is about for them. That is what the networks get out of this. Yes, it's absolutely subscribe to Disney Plus and you can stream these games while you're at your friend's wedding, and you can watch the Patriots and the Bucks, you know. Um, I think that's what it's about for them. I think what we're seeing here is the first steps into sort of the larger world about broadcasting here. That's what it's about. Because if you notice, I think I said this before, but um, there's some big time television properties that are going to streaming only. The new Frasier show, like I mentioned a couple shows ago, that's not going to network. That's going to Paramount Plus. There's a bunch of shows now that in years past would be put on network television, and now it's not. It's just streaming only. The Mandalorian. in years past would either be in a theater or it would be on the Disney, channel network, and it's not. It's because they know the future is a streaming thing, and so the NFL is a way to draw everybody in, subscribe, and you can do this. Come see the light. That's what's I think we're really seeing the future
Yeah, and
here.
I think the other I totally agree, and I think the other big piece of evidence on that theory is the length. 10 years, right? That means that they know they have the. I mean, we can start to count some of this in months at this point in terms of how fast they're moving, but they also are planning for long term. So they have a long runway here now to set this up and to sort of set that new world order. So I think the length of the contract to me also said it.
Yeah, no, I think so because they could have insisted on a 5-year deal and gone, look, hey, NFL. I mean, we know you're the million-pound gorilla, but we don't know what the landscape's going to be like, and we want to be conservative. Let's just extend the current deal basically on the same terms for another few years. No, they totally reset the bar here, completely. And the other thing is, I think that what was significant is you mentioned it, but we didn't really talk about it. The ability to flex games to Mondays, not just Sunday, I think is significant because there's only a limited number of important games late in the season, and so now that you're flexing it to Monday, and then you're also flexing to Sunday, you're going to see a lot of Bengals and Jaguars on Sunday night or a Sunday afternoon, but that's really allowing the NFL to really highlight every important game in prime time, and I think that is an important part of it as well.
And I heard John, what's his name? The sports business guy. Let me get his
John
name.
Oran.
Yeah, John Allran. I heard him this week on a podcast, and he said the reason why, especially on Monday nights, they haven't done flex. They've been resistant to it. Is really because it kind of screws the fans. It really, now not the fans that want to go, the ticket holding fans, the live experience fans. It's probably a boon for the TV watching fans, especially at the league level. But it does have a lot of negative impacts on fans, which is what So think about, like, let's say you're out of market and you want to, let's say you want to take a trip to Dallas. I don't know why you do that.
I've done this with my dad for
Yeah.
years. I haven't done it in a couple of years, but we would pick one game a year that's a good game and intentionally not go to DC. We'd intentionally go to the other city just to see a new place. And, that would really bum me out if 4 days before a trip we've planned for 4 months.
Flex to Monday.
All of a sudden it's flex to money. We can't go because we got to work and everything else.
Yeah, so if you want more evidence that the fan experience is the least important thing, this is another little data point.
$100 billion makes the NFL feel a lot better about screwing the fans over.
Before we move on, I'll just give you a kind of a breakdown of where this is. So for the Monday night package, the current deal was $2 billion. The new deal is $2.7 billion. For the NFC Sunday afternoon package, the old deal was 1.1. The new deal is 2.2. So that's essentially a double. For the Sunday night package, again, 1 billion, 3 million and change, 1.03 goes to 2 billion. The AFC Sunday afternoon. Now, you used to be able to say this was Fox and CBS, but a couple years ago they agreed to do some cross share, so that's why they're kind of just doing it by division. AFC was 1 billion for their Sunday afternoon package. It's now 2 billion, so basically another double. And the Thursday night went from 770 million to 1.32 billion.
Now, one thing I wanted to interject in this, and that basically shows that a lot of these are doubling. There's a huge healthy profit in here. CNBC reported that on the back of the NFL getting this media rights package done, the NBA has now set its sights on a huge increase as well. So this is this is Front Office Sports, not CNBC. This is Abigail Gentrup, March 24th, 2021. So their Front Office Sports are reporting that CNBC reported that the NBA wants to increase their rights package from 51 billion to 75 billion. The existing package is worth 51 billion. They're now shooting for 75 billion, and CNBC thinks they can get it. Believe it or not, Disney looks like they're willing to pay 2.7 billion. That was the NFL amount, but and there's not a whole ton of details here on this, but point is, on the heels of this increase, the NBA is looking for about a third, roughly a 33% increase on its media rights package, which is coming up. And the NBA doesn't have half the ratings, or TV ratings or attendance in person that the NFL does. So this is another sort of feather in the cap of networks kind of deal where they can use the NBA to, guide people to streaming and whatnot, because that's a ton of money for a property that's not struggled but hasn't succeeded like the NFL has.
No, I think they'll probably bank on a streamer or some startup that has the money to buy in and needs some sports cachet, and I think that'll be their negotiating tactic against your ESPN and your TNTs and your traditional outlets for their product. So, and that may work for them. So because there might be like let's just continue to use Amazon, that says it's worth it for us to own that brand to some degree and outbid everyone else. But that'll be the NBA's path, and it may not work. They may end up with a marginal increase on their current package, basically.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'll throw in here is that there's another front office sports report. Amazon's also bought 21 Yankees games this season, meaning that Amazon is going to stream 21 New York Yankees games. So they've negotiated and bought that right from the Yes Network, which owns the Yankees broadcast rights, most of them. And so that's Amazon, once again increasing its net into other things. So obviously, fast forward a few years, you're going to see Amazon, and they've greatly increased, the television. I hate to even call it television anymore. I don't even really know what to call it.
Content.
Their content. They are producing their own content now. That's gotten tractions and attention in Hollywood and all that stuff. They're buying sports. I think if you fast forward 5 years from now, you're going to see Amazon try to swallow everybody. Because don't forget how big Amazon is. Amazon could buy the NFL 4 or 5 times over, and from a cash perspective. So, I think we're going to see a very high rate of growth of Amazon in the future with regard to content production and content, and then buying sports and whatnot. I think Amazon is a major player in this going forward. And I understand what you're saying, Chris, about, the networks kind of box them out but I'm not talking about the immediate future. I'm talking about years from now,
No, and I almost mean when they box them out, it's because they have their own similar plays, right? So it's not like to save broadcast TV. It's to give them enough time to build their own streaming empires.
I just think that it may not work, but my point here is I think Amazon is setting itself up to try and swallow up the rest of it. Now, it's a game being played by the networks versus Amazon for sure. But what I'm saying is I think that's what Amazon's goal is to defeat that and buy up significant amounts more of this content in the future. That I don't know if it'll work, but I'm saying that's what Amazon's trying to do.
For sure. I 100% agree there. I just think it's a small to medium size victory for those other companies. I'm going to start calling them networks, because it gives them, it does carve out some space to compete, but I don't know if that means that they can compete long term.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. And I've said this off the air, Chris, but I think Amazon's going to face a congressional challenge for it being a monopoly at some point in the future. So, I would hesitate on Amazon on handing them a victory in years, because I think they get so big that somebody's going to have to do something about them at some point.
That's definitely a huge risk for them. All right, let's move on to what is just turning out to be...
from intelligence to incredible stupidity.
I don't know what is going on here. I do, but the Deshaun Watson... Talk about your bad off seasons. This just... what is it? Are we up to 16 women with accusations?
Yeah. Oh God. Okay, so I had the indescribable pleasure of reading 16 separate lawsuits this week. It's 16 lawsuits. Apparently, there's more than 20 women who are involved who haven't filed lawsuits yet. So, to set the big picture stage here, 10 days ago or so, there's a lawyer in Houston named Tony Busby. Now, Tony is not a regular lawyer. Tony is a big time, one of probably the top three, I'd say, plaintiffs' lawyers in Houston, who's probably as wealthy as Deshaun Watson. Okay, this is not some guy. This is not me, doing regular stuff. This is a fabulously wealthy, huge, very powerful, very influential attorney who ran for mayor, a while ago, lost, but that kind of guy. He had a couple lawsuits against Deshaun Watson, and in the coming 10 days, this is now expanded to 16. And so every allegation is about the same. Again, I read all 16 of them here. So let me just describe the pattern about what is alleged. Watson contacts women, usually massage professionals, but sometimes there were a couple like estheticians. There's one personal trainer. But most of them are massage professionals, and contracts with them to get a massage. It's either at his house, at their office. A couple of them are I believe, at the woman's house where she provides the service. And then instead of Chris, massages aren't my thing, so I don't, I'd have to guess at the protocol. But he violated what appears to be traditional protocol by just taking off all his clothes, covering himself with a tiny towel, and then at some point he places his privates in the hand of the woman. And then most of the women recoiled in horror, ended the session. Then two of them allege that he forced them to, I'm trying to keep this PG-13, he forced them to perform oral acts on them. Two of them allege that. So at the end of it all, there are two allegations of civil sexual assault. There are, all the rest of them are regular civil assault charges, and then there's intentional infliction of emotional distress. Now, what's interesting is each of the lawsuits specifically state that the plaintiff, and they're all Jane Does, by the way, we don't know any of the names of any of them, but the lawsuits all claim that they are seeking the minimum economic damage amount that can be sought in district court, which I think is $100,000. That's what's in the lawsuit. However, the intentional infliction of emotional distress allegation is treble damages. So he's not being completely truthful. But Busby came out and told the press that we're not doing this for money. We're doing this to expose this, monster. I think that's the term he used for what he is. I don't buy that for a minute because, these women are regular people. I don't think they're going to turn down $1 million settlement. So I think it's that part is being a bit disingenuous. But the pattern here is the same. It's get a hold of a woman on Instagram. Hey, come massage me. And then the massage goes horribly wrong. All of these allegations are within the last year. And the reason is there's a 2-year statute of limitations on tort claims in Texas. So who knows what went on back in 2018 and before. And also, these are just the women that refused his request. So this guy has clearly been doing this a ton. I've got a lot to say, but I'll pause there and let you comment.
I don't have a ton of legal analysis or all that. I'll say this. One, I'm a big Deshaun Watson fan, so this sort of bums me out, regardless of whether it's true or not true, whatever. I'm just kind of bummed out that one of my favorite my favorite team players is embroiled in all this, and here's some things, and I am, and if it turns out to be true, then shame on him, and he should be, all the negative things happen. So with that caveat in place, there are a few things that seem a little weird to me in this case. Now, it's a lot of women. So it's, to coordinate a conspiracy of that many people is not easy, and usually, you shouldn't even entertain as something to think about because it just isn't. It's just hard to do. But there are some inconsistencies here. I think it's weird that none of this has moved to criminal court yet. It may. I'm not saying it won't, but it hasn't as of yet. I think
to that point, I believe the lawyer said they have now reported it and asked for an investigation, but we've heard no details about that actually happening.
right. So yeah, we could easily wake up Tuesday morning and hear that something's happened in criminal court, but as of yet, it hasn't. So this is a somewhat of a strange route on some of the seriousness of these allegations. Two, I he is so embroiled with the Houston Texans and what they're going to do with him and trade and all that. There's something here that I know there's some stories out here, and this is wild conspiracy theory fantasies on my part, but there are some rumors and some reports that is this a coordinated smear campaign by the team to some degree, and I also. What was the expectations here? Did he think he was purchasing something and then they decided to tell a story afterwards? I don't know. There's a lot to learn here, and I will fully admit that I'm grasping at straws and hopes that he clears his name.
Yeah, you're a little Oliver Stone-ish there, I guess. About the Texans, number one, I know a couple people over there. They're professional. They would never, I don't think, do something like that. And also, by the way, if they're going to trade this asset, they're ruining their trade value by entering into a conspiracy, which incidentally could get them sued for the amount of money that Watson would be losing in a new contract. So they're exposed. If they did something like this, they'd be exposing themselves to hundreds of millions of dollars in liability. So I think there's almost zero chance that the Texans are involved in some weird conspiracy. Now, as to, yes, I think it's a bit odd that the women first filed a civil lawsuit and didn't go to the police first or have their attorney go to the police. That's odd. There's no doubt about it. That's odd. I don't think that this attorney is involved in anything weird because you guys have to understand that this is a guy who has Deshaun Watson level money already himself. So he's not going to risk that kind of income for Deshaun Watson or for a bunch of random massage, professionals. So I don't think that part's a conspiracy. I think it is a bit odd that they didn't go to the police first. But that having been said, we'll see. 16 women is a lot of women to make stuff up. Yeah. I could buy, if there's one random allegation, whatever, and there's no physical evidence, and maybe there is, we haven't seen it yet. I could buy one or two women can make something up. I don't really buy that 16 women want to put themselves through this kind of torture, and just the story. And yes, he's using the attorney used the same form for all of the petitions. They used a lot of the same language, a lot of the same descriptions. He didn't put a ton of effort and a ton of facts, into the petitions themselves. But this is just the beginning. So I tend to think, and it kind of just the story rings. Doesn't, I wouldn't say rings true. It's just an allegation, but it's written in a believable fashion. Let's say it like that. So I think we will probably find that the truth, if I had to guess, I would say most of these things probably happened, but we'll find out and they'll have their day in court. If one thing I don't buy at all is that this isn't about money. That I don't believe. I would say if they're not in it for the money, I would offer all these women. I were Deshaun Watson, I'd offer them all $100,000 in settlement and see if they take it. If it's not about the money, settle it. Do these women really want to torture themselves by going through 2 years of a trial? I know Watson doesn't want to do that. He'd have to take the fifth, number one, because all 16 of these petitions contain allegations of conduct which could be criminal. And not just the sexual assault part where he's forcing the heads of women into his groin area, but the other conduct is criminal, could be criminal would be criminal conduct if true. He's exposing himself. He's touching people, with his privates. All of that is at a minimum battery and probably other stuff. So, yes, there's some odd things about it, but I think he's got a very serious problem. Now, in terms of the NFL, the NFL doesn't want to put one of its biggest stars on the commissioner's exempt list, but I don't know how they can avoid it. How do they not do it? I mean, the NFL is apparently investigating this. That's all we know. They're investigating. Now, the NFL takes forever to investigate anything. All these player, players behaving badly stuff seems to take the NFL forever to investigate anything. So it's not going to be over soon. But I don't know how they don't put Watson on the commissioner's exempt list for the season.
I think it's definitely a possibility, all season, part of the season, and the NFL does not need evidence, does not need a conviction, does not need a settlement, does not need a civil court ruling on damages. It doesn't need any. Those are not prerequisite. Whatever, I can't say that.
Prerequisites.
Yeah, for them taking any action that they deem appropriate.
Yeah, the NFL standard. Okay, so let me explain this real fast. There's a bunch of different standards of proof at play here. The standard of proof for a criminal conviction, should Watson be charged, is beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the highest standard under the law. The standard of proof in a civil lawsuit, there's some legal language to this, but it boils down to more likely than not. That's the civil standard. Now, the NFL standard is lower than it's written in the CBA. They just have to have a reasonable basis for belief something happened. That's it. It's defined by them. So they could go, we think this kind of happened. And that's all they need, to enact remedies under the CBA. So the NFL doesn't need a conviction. They don't need anything. They can just go, we think you did it, period. That's what they did to Ezekiel Elliott, remember?
Yeah, and Ben Roethlisberger a couple years before that.
Yeah, him too.
So, right. They don't, so if you're a Houston Texans fan or whatever team he plays on next, crossing your...
It's going to be the Texans. Who would trade for this now?
That's
the other thing. Is why would the Houston Texans be involved in some conspiracy?
I admitted it was fantasy, Steve.
Well, here's the way it could be true, okay? Here's the way, here's how Oliver Stone would film this. The Texans don't actually want to trade Deshaun Watson. Watson wants to be traded.
So
now, I would argue
forcing
that...
him into staying,
Yes, exactly. Now, I would argue that Watson probably wants to leave because he knew this was coming. Because, by the way, also, these people don't normally just drop lawsuits out of thin air. Usually you go make demand letters and things. And so or verbal, maybe the lawyer calls his lawyer. I would argue that Watson probably knew this was coming, and that's partly why he's insisted on getting out of Houston. But yeah, the real Oliver Stone conspiracy would be that the Texans are doing all this to force him to stay by tanking their trade value. They'd say, "Hey, we can't trade you now that all these allegations are out here. So look, you got to stay." That would be the Oliver Stone conspiracy. I think that's just absurd, but that would be, I think, if you really want to dream it up in your mind, Chris, that's where you ought to go with it.
Well, there we go. Well, as Washington fans, we can all be grateful that we didn't, which 2/3 of the fan base would have done a month ago. We didn't trade Chase Daniel and 4 first-round picks in early February.
Would it be just the most Washington thing ever?
Totally.
To trade for this and then have 16 sexual assault lawsuits dropped on you?
Right. The fact that didn't happen maybe shows that the luck is turned. I don't know.
Really? Because that would have happened.
That would have been,
that was going to happen.
That would have been the what you would almost have predicted if to happen. But it didn't. So there you go. All right, Steve. Tell the fans what you all are chatting about on the Hogsty. I imagine it's free agency and draft.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're talking draft. We're talking free agency. This week's show, which is out now at the time you listen to this, features Mark Bullock, who's one of our very favorite guests, one of our very favorite film guys. Seasons of Discontent will be back. We're changing formats a little bit in that show. We'll let Rick talk about that, but it will be back in the future. And we have all of our written content. We've got a new writer, Dave Earl, and Dave's task every week is to assess the opinions and thoughts of the Washington fan base about controversial topics. So that's fun to read. So pay attention to everything on the website.
All right, there you go. We will see you in 2 weeks.